Explain like I'm 5. If inflation is continuous year on year, how does that become tenable over say 100,200 years? This thought came to me as I was food shopping. So I know there are things that increase the price of certain items: beer, cigarettes, sugar tax UK, but they also increase with inflation each year like other foods such as bread. Apparently, the average inflation rate over the last 10 years in the US is 2.37 as of July 2023. So if it is the same in another 10 years, over the space of 20 years inflation would be 4.74. If we say inflation is the same, and so on and so on, if it continues, wouldn't prices for say bread just end up getting higher and higher and be like $10.15? And as wages don't rise with inflation the same way foods do, fewer and fewer people each decade could afford it. Now this is just random thoughts I had when shopping, and I am not making any comments on any politics. All I wanted to know is my thinking true that prices will just go up and up indefinitely decade on decade? Why or why not? And I am an idiot, so imagine I am 5 x 200b. Edit went to sleep and woke up to about 300 notifications. Thanks for your explanation to a Neanderthal like myself. x 200b. Yes, prices continue to go up. So do wages though. Not always at the same rate, but that's a separate discussion. The damage deflation can do to an economy is really bad. So governments deliberately maintain some inflation to avoid it. In 100 years the minimum wage will be $100 per hour, and that will be to scrape by with room mates also making $100 per hour. Didn't do the math. The short answer is yes. I'm 67 years old, and I remember when a pack of cigarettes or a gallon of gas were 29 cents. A soft drink and a bag of chips was 25 cents. A new car was under $2,000. You get the picture. Yeah, prices on everything goes up. Movies used to be $1. Now they're $15 or more. If inflation goes up too high, they just knock some zeros off the end of the currency revaluation. Zimbabwe famously did this several times. Turkey chopped 6 zeros off their currency in 2005. Romania also revalued their currency in 2005. So something that was 10,000 became 1. Venezuela revalued their currency 2 years ago. A 1 million.00 note became 1.00. In theory, wages are supposed to more or less keep up with inflation. That hasn't happened super consistently, especially over the last 30 years or so. But it has happened, and wages are rising. By the time bread costs $10 a loaf, in theory, the average person will look at it the same way that they look at a $3 load of bread today. The U.S. Federal Reserve has a publicly stated goal of ensuring inflation stays around 2% annually. This number is entirely arbitrary. But yes, in the long term prices will continue to increase decade after decade. Or at least the Fed will try to make that the case. In the 1920s, you made far less money. But things cost a lot less, too. You could also buy a house for $6,000. Or rent an apartment in New York City for like $60 a month. $1 would buy 3 pounds of steak or 2 dozen eggs. A movie ticket was about 15 cents. A meal at a diner was maybe 40 cents. Inflation has existed for longer than any of us have been around. The problem is when inflation goes up but wages do not. As someone who could buy a loaf of bread for $0.25 in the 70s and now have to pay $7.99 a loaf, Granted, it's gluten-free now. I have watched inflation cause prices to go up regularly my entire life, but even so, I am gobsmacked by what things cost now. Not a lot of explain like I'm 5 answers. Answer: inflation and wage growth rise nearly the same over time. There will be a time where the median home price in the US will be over $1 million. Median household income will be around $170,000 at that time too. In order to support those increased prices. It isn't. Sooner or later they'll have to put out a new dollar. IIRC. Mexico's new peso was worth 10k old pesos. Edit 1,000 old pesos. Let's say I make $50 hour. My house costs $200,000. And a hot dog costs $2. Then 10 years pass and a hot dog now costs $4, but also my house costs $400,000 and I make $100 hour. Things are more expensive. But I have more money. I still earn 25 hot dogs per hour. That's how inflation usually works. Things cost more but people have more money. So it should even out. But encourages people to invest their money in the economy to keep up with inflation. Ah yes. How can we not introduce the need of an ever-growing economy with finite resources on a planet? Long story short, we are kicking the can. But since you don't care or love for your 1000th grandchild, we will just keep on consuming. Take into consideration stuff like world or civil wars, too. But it's not so clear-cut. Stuff that was cheap then will always be cheap. Like bread. Unless there is a much bigger economic problem. And there have always been extremely rich and extremely poor. Some stuff will always be expensive. It doesn't just go haywire, leaving people behind. It acts according to what the population can carry. If you read 19th century British literature, they act like £1,000 is this astronomical sum of money someone can live off of for years. £1,000 might last you 2 weeks in London today. It's not tenable. 6. Inflation is considered catastrophic after 10 years. And it has been catastrophic. But just for the third world countries. Now it's finally here in the first world. Yes. It will, since there's nothing to back up the currency that's being printed. In the distant future, USA for example can create a new currency measure called neo-dollar where it's pegged to the old dollar value, where one neo-dollar is equal to 100 United States dollars. Just pure speculation. Take it with a grain of salt. Yes. You're exactly right. The plan is to enslave the entire population of the planet. That's why it's now immoral to have children. You're signing them up for a lifetime of slavery without their consent. Also remember, the inflation numbers are way off from the true values. You can't double the price of food and fuel and then say inflation is less than 10. The value of $1 in 1843 only matters to you in 2023 if you happen to own a time machine or otherwise exist in both years. Apples and oranges. Just considering biodiversity loss, climate change, and our complete dependency on fossil fuels, inflation really isn't a big problem in itself. Our whole society isn't tenable as it is. And we'll run into huge problems long before 100 years.